to the Beto O'Rourke's rally, encounter, including a border a breakthrough on the border deal. We could be looking at maybe in avoiding a shutdown.
We start this hour with the Fox News alert. An agreement has been reached in principle, the Congresspeople say, to secure the border and avoid a dreaded second government partial shutdown.
That's right. Now the clock is ticking for lawmakers to hammer out the details before the deadline on Friday night.
And then how will this deal be accepted by both sides, if at all? Griff Jenkins is live in Washington with the latest. Hey, Griff.
Hey, guys. Yeah, we're thin on details here, but it appears that both sides could claim some victory. Let's look at this. Now, for the White House, you've got $1.375 billion for 55 new miles of border barrier. Don't call it a wall. It's a barrier, according to Democrats. All of it will be in the Rio Grande Valley sector, and the Border Patrol can use any currently deployed design they want to build it. Now, for Democrats, it has a 17% decrease in ICE detention beds, reducing the number from 49,000 currently down to just over 40,000. But there may be some wiggle room there because DHS funding elsewhere could give them the authority for more beds in the event of a surge on the border. The big question is whether the president, who put the wall front and center in last night's rally, would sign this.
Walls save lives. My administration has put forward a compromise. It's compassionate, and it's going to solve our problem.
Already, this deal is not going over well with conservatives. Congressman Mark Meadows tweeting this. This conference agreement is a hardly serious attempt to secure our border or stop the flow of illegal immigration. It kicks the can down the road yet again, failing to address the critical priorities outlined by Border Patrol chiefs. Congress is not doing its job. Next up, we'll actually get the language, hopefully at some point today or tomorrow, guys.
That's right. But one important element, thanks, Griff, one important element is when Nancy Pelosi says, here's $1.3 billion, not one dime, not $1 for a barrier or a fence or anything, Steny Hoyer said, I have no problems with barrier. We're wondering what's going to happen there. Now, all of a sudden, you got 1.37 or whatever it is, or just under 1.4 billion. Right. And it can go to anything you want. You can put bollard fence, can fix fence, or can continue.
Well, and speaking of Steny Hoyer, he said yesterday he's got no problem with ICE. ICE does a really important thing for us.
Yep.
Keep in mind, yesterday when we last saw you, the talks had broken down because at the 11th hour, the Democrats had started talking about limiting the number of beds that they could be used for detention. That's really a euphemism for how many people could ICE possibly arrest during the course of a year and then deport and process and things like that. And the Republicans said, this is a non-starter. That's not going to work. So the president last night in El Paso was talking about that and how the Democrats were trying to put a cap on the number of people that ICE could detain. And he didn't like it at all.
We love our ICE officers. ICE officers have made listen to these numbers, 266,000 arrests of criminal aliens, including those charged or convicted of approximately 100,000 assaults, 4,000 kidnappings, and 4,000 murders, killings, murders. If we cut detention space, we are cutting loose dangerous criminals into our country. Slashing ICE detention is the first step of many for the far left. I call them the radical left. We will never abolish ICE.
Well, the sheriff of Rockingham County, his name is Sam Page, is on the same page as the president. Listen.
It jeopardizes public safety. I look at it, if we put a cap in my jail, at a local jail, and said you can't house no more than 200, then where are these persons going to be? They're going to be out in the community with the opportunity to re-victimize persons in our communities. I gave the letter to the president. 72% of the persons that are being held, they're being held for mandatory detention crimes. And 90% of the persons that are being detained are charged or convicted of criminal offenses or in deportation status.
So that was the sheriff last night. Keep in mind, when it comes to detention beds, they feel as though, does the administration, they could, and does Senator Shelby, they could free up $750 million and get up to 52,000 beds. They could end up with more. Sadly, we're going to need more to do this. So before everyone gets in their talking points and grab sides later on today, there's so much wiggle room in this deal that both sides can walk away and be a little disappointed and be a little happy.
Well, the president said last night in El Paso, we're going to build that wall. So how's he going to do it? Mark Meadows, who Griff was just quoting a moment ago, who's one of his confidants up on Capitol Hill, he has sent out some tweets in the last couple of weeks talking about how there are ways for the president under U.S. code, a couple of different codes, where he can reprogram money without declaring a national emergency. So maybe that's what the president's talking about. Stay tuned. We know that now the White House is taking a look at it. Apparently, Nancy Pelosi got a look at it yesterday. She said, I'm okay with it.
A lot of people are calling for him to veto it, but you have Senator Richard Shelby, the Republican from Alabama. He said, when asked, will the president approve of this? He said, we think so, and we hope so. But the president did say yesterday, I'm never going to sign a bill that forces the mass release of violent criminals. And if you look at the stats, ICE figures 66% of the immigrants that were detained last year in 2018 were previously convicted of crimes. And in 2016, that number was 86%.
Right. Yeah, it's real. And they're already building the wall from 2017. They start this week, and then they'll be able to continue building it. Now there's enough money there. Meanwhile, 7 minutes after the top of the hour, one of the many controversies coming your way, and it's easy to have gotten buried in getting caught up in what's happening in Virginia with all three of these high-ranking officials. But it's hard also to take your eye off this Congresswoman, Ilhan Omar. She's out of Minnesota, and she has made a few comments where clearly she seems to be have a problem with our pro-Israeli position in America. And why do I think that? Because I read her tweets.
Yeah, because she had to apologize for this. It was a tweet in response to journalist Glenn Greenwald's tweet. Republican leader Kevin McCarthy threatened punishment for her and Rashida Tlaib over their criticism of Israel. It's stunning how much time U.S. political leaders spend defending a foreign nation, even if it means attacking free speech rights of Americans. And then she tweeted, it's all about the Benjamins, baby. She has since walked that back and apologized to a point. Here's the president and what he said about her yesterday.
He said, I think she should be ashamed of herself. I think it was a terrible statement, and I don't think her apology was adequate. A lot of Democrats came out against her, condemning her. Nancy Pelosi condemned her, and that's when she decided to release her statement.
Right, and she said that AIPAC is paying off, essentially, lawmakers to have this pro-Israeli stance. Ben Shapiro took umbrage with this.
How do you not have a censorship of a resolution of censure against Ilhan Omar for all of this? And the reason is because the Democratic Party deep down actually agrees with Ilhan Omar. The Democratic Party, unfortunately, has become a party that is replete with anti-Semitism and certainly with anti-Israel activity. I was there in 2012 when the idea of Jerusalem as Israel's capital was booed at their convention. The willingness to consort with open Jew-hating in the Democratic Party is pretty obvious at this point.
Okay, so Nancy Pelosi and top Democratic leaders did say, look, you've got to apologize. But they did not, as the New York Post in their op-ed page this morning says, the failure to discipline Omar stands in contrast to House Republicans who stripped Representative Steve King of his committee assignments for lamenting the fact that the white supremacy is deemed an offensive term. So they're saying that's exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah, and by the way, to Nancy Pelosi's credit, she condemned the remarks and demanded the apology, and that got her attention. So we'll see where that goes. At least I just don't know why she'd still leave there on the Foreign Relations Committee when if she's that upset with her stance on Israel. Why would you have her in such an important committee that has everything to do with our policy on Israel in the House?
Great question. And that's what a lot of people are scratching their heads about today.
All right, we're also asking, is Jillian here?
Oh,
there she is.
Surprise.
She has some headlines for us.
That's right. Good morning. Let's get you caught up on what's happening in Virginia. And today, one of the women accusing Virginia's lieutenant governor of sexual assault will speak out publicly. Dr. Vanessa Tyson will be part of a panel titled Betrayal and Courage in the Age of Me Too at Stanford University tonight. This happening as several members of Justin Fairfax's staff resign over the allegations against him. Fairfax has denied the allegations and called for an FBI investigation into them. The former Chicago police officer who shot and killed Laquan McDonald could get a new sentence. Prosecutors believe the nearly 7-year sentence given to Jason Van Dyke last month is not enough. They're asking the Illinois Supreme Court to review the case. Van Dyke was found guilty of second-degree murder and aggravated battery for shooting the 17-year-old in 2014. People in Iowa could soon support their favorite candidates without leaving their homes. State Democrats proposing virtual caucuses in the 2020 election. It's the biggest proposed change to the system in nearly 50 years. They say the use of smart devices will make the process more accessible and transparent. Currently, people have to physically show up and stand in groups to support presidential candidates. Country music legend Garth Brooks is trading in his cowboy hat for a baseball cap. Brooks is joining the Pittsburgh Pirates for a week of spring training this year. It's the 4th time he's joined a major league team. This year, he's returning to the field for the 20th anniversary of the Garth Brooks Teammates for Kids Foundation. It pairs children with professional athletes and has raised more than $100 million. Even though he did not grow up in Pittsburgh, he grew up a Pirates fan.
Right.
Cool to do that.
It's just shocking. $100 million that has raised. Good for him. All right. Thank you, Jillian. All right, straight ahead, California Senator Kamala Harris prosecuted pot as California's Attorney General, but now that she's running for president, she's saying this.
I think that it gives a lot of people joy, and we need more joy.
She's talking about pot giving people a lot of joy. Is that the biggest political flip-flop ever?
We need to research, which is one of the reasons we need to legalize it. We need to move it on the schedule so that we can research.
Have you ever smoked?
I have.
Okay.
And I think that it gives a lot of people joy, and we need more joy.
We need more joy in this world.
And the crowd roared. Presidential candidate Kamala Harris pushing for marijuana legalization at the federal level, in part because, quote, it brings joy. But the California senator didn't back legalization for recreational use until last year. Is this a flip-flop because she's now running for president? Here to react, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, Dr. David Murray, formerly worked in the Office of the National Drug Control Policy. Dr. Murray, you're concerned about the tone especially. Why?
Oh, good morning, Brian. Because my impression is this is no longer a time in this country where we want to make jokes about addiction. And this was a very jocular tone. And moreover, I don't think anyone who wants to be a presidential leader can ignore and be blissfully kind of unaware of the medical and scientific literature on just how dangerous and serious legalized commercial high-potency marijuana is. I also sensed a little bit of an insensitivity here, since I'm very familiar with the thousands of parents all across the country who are struggling to recover their own children from marijuana addiction and where that leads. It's doing great damage in adolescent lives. And any senator, any presidential aspirant really needs to be more aware of what the research shows, and I think needs to move beyond the Cheech and Chong world of laughing about Jamaica and California. It didn't help Jamaica. It's not going to help California. Legalization is a much more serious threat.
So, Dr. Murray, a couple of things. Number one, people say put pot here and put fentanyl and heroin here. Don't mix the two. What do you say? The one doesn't lead to the other.
Brian, I think the research is actually disrupting that simplified notion that there's a soft drug over here called marijuana, and it can be separated from the overdose crisis that the country is going through, the unprecedented. More than 70,000 Americans lost their lives in the most recent year, 2017. That's an astonishing link, however, is that early adolescent marijuana exposure is actually tied to the opioid epidemic and the overdose disaster that we've kind of inculcated here. It primes the brain, particularly for young adolescents who are exposed to the high-potency industrial commercial marijuana that is available now. They're smoking shatter and they're smoking concentrates. They're vaporizing them that are 70 and 90% concentrates of THC. The neurotoxicity here is extraordinary. They're linked epidemics.
Dr. Murray, we only have 20 seconds left, but I want to get this. She's just going with the trend. First there's medicinal, then there's recreational. More and more states are legalizing it. So she wants to get the young vote by staying with the trend. What do you say to her?
My impression is you don't get the young vote by putting them in great jeopardy, and the damage that we're going to do to this generation in this experiment is very great. My impression is she's made a mistake. She called for more research, but unfortunately she said, let's legalize first. and then do research on what we've done to ourselves. That's not the way to work. She needs to be more familiar with the research that's already been done.
Gotcha.
That is issuing a strong warning to us. Don't go there.
And Dr. Murray said in the pre-interview, a lot of these polls are soft, much softer than we were led to believe about approval and the way Americans think of it. Dr. David Murray, important conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir.
Straight ahead. What's at the top of Amy Klobuchar's agenda if she becomes president? Rejoining the Paris climate change, of course. Does she know why we left to begin with? Our next guest has the science.
The people are on our side when it comes to climate change. Why? Because like you and I, they believe in science.
That's New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's favorability rating, his lowest since taking office. According to a Siena College survey, the Democrat dropped 8 percentage points in just 1 month. Next, 1.17 million. That is how much a man disguised in a Scream mask just won in the lottery. The Jamaican man wore the mask from the horror movie to keep his identity a secret. He claims the winning numbers came to him in a dream, and we all said we need to have that dream. And finally, number one, J.J. Watt will become the first NFL star to be the Grand Marshal of the Daytona 500. He will be the one to tell the drivers to start their engines before Sunday's race on Fox. Steve and Brian, over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ainsley. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, as you can see, just announced her candidacy for presidency and wasted no time promising to fight climate change and rejoin the Paris Climate Accord that the Trump administration unjoined.
The people are on our side when it comes to climate change. Why? Because like you and I, they believe in science. And on day one, we will rejoin the International Climate Agreement.
Well, there's a reason why President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the deal, and our next guest says it would stay. It should stay that way. Joining us right now to discuss this, Executive Director for ClimateDepot.com and author of the Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, Marc Morano. The world booed when we got out, Mark. Why shouldn't we go back in?
Well, amazingly, the one thing that the key thing that Donald Trump has been consistent on since the 1980s has been deals that are good for America. You can go back to his Oprah Winfrey interview. So the UN Paris Agreement was literally one of the simplest decisions that President Trump could possibly make, and he made a brilliant decision. The UN Paris Agreement would do nothing for the climate, and using the UN's own estimate, even if you believe Al Gore and the UN scientific claims, it would delay a temperature by 8 months if President Obama's climate commitments came into full fruition by 100 years. In other words, it does nothing for the climate, virtually does nothing for emissions and imposing it on the United States. And beyond that, she says she believes in science. The head of the UN climate panel has actually said he, quote, global warming is my religion. So here you have a UN group that wants to redistribute wealth, centrally transform our economy, and they want the United States in because they want to get our money and they want wealth transfers, and they openly talk about global governance. So it was the greatest decision Donald Trump made, and it has no impact on the climate one way or the other.
Okay, so regarding the Paris Climate Accord, these are some of the points. It would limit the amount of greenhouse gases. It would keep global temps well below 2 degrees Celsius. Review each country's contribution every 5 years. Rich countries to help poor by providing climate finance. Ultimately, though, Mark, how much would it have cost the United States, and how many degrees would it have changed the temperature?
Well, that's the thing. Now, it's been called the most expensive treaty in world history, with a price tag of upwards of $100 trillion, a global cost of $1 to $2 trillion annually. And again, you mentioned this 2-degree thing, and I actually point out this was the authors of this 2 degrees target actually admit it was, quote, pulled from thin air, or the scientists in the United Nations admit this. So, and then even the Washington Post has acknowledged that even if you're afraid of global warming, the UN Paris Agreement would basically do nothing, has no impact on the climate. This is medieval witchcraft to think that we can all come together with some treaty, make a bunch of pledges, and have a temperature 100 years that's different. But again, using the UN's own numbers, 8 months the temperature rise would be delayed if you believe the UN scientific claims. Not even a year if the U.S. does its full commitments under President Obama.
Mark, no mechanism for enforcement, and we have to take the word that gradually China would go live up to the standards that we are, gradually, as well as Russia.
Yes. And that's absurd. I mean, China, India are building coal plants on a skyrocketing scale right now. China's emissions are going to continue for the next more than a decade until they peak. But the United States is expected to come in, and as President Trump has rightly pointed out, this is a bad deal for America. It's punishing Americans while giving everyone else off the hook. And again, this isn't the Middle Ages. We don't pass laws to control hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and control temperature. But Amy Klobuchar knows one thing. This is what the Democratic base has to hear. And
that's why
go back.
And that's why they all signed on to the Green New Deal.
That's
that
right.
topic another day. All right.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mark.
All right,
Thank you.
Coming up straight ahead, what are voters in El Paso saying about President Trump and Beto O'Rourke's dueling rallies? Todd Pyro there having breakfast with friends. We'll check in with him shortly.
That's right. And you love him as Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump.
Do not salute me. There's goddamn snipers all around this area who'd love to grease an officer. I'm Lieutenant Dan Taylor. Welcome to Fort Platoon.
Yep, welcome. But did you know Gary Sinise actually grew up in a military family with service stretching all the way to World War I? He's here live with a brand new book.
Forrest Gump ended up changing millions of lives, especially the man who played him.
In 1994, Gary Sinise was honored by the DAV, the Disabled American Veterans Organization, for playing that role that brought, quote, the sacrifice of disabled Americans back into the public. The key word there is back. It was a moment that inspired him to dedicate his life to honoring our hero.
And that's how his book begins. That story and more are in his brand new memoir, Grateful American, A Journey from Self to Service. It's out today. Always love when Gary's here, especially this book, which I had a chance to read. It is fantastic.
It is good.
Great to see you, Gary.
Gary, great to see you.
Thank you.
Why was that important, you think, for us to roll in that clip to start? What changed for you that day as Forrest Gump was received?
What, playing the part?
Yeah.
Oh, it was a big moment. Certainly. I mean, that was early in my film career. I hadn't done that much. A couple of movies I did, Mice and Manners of Film.
Right.
And I think the producers and directors saw that film. They invited me to come and audition. I read the script. Vietnam veterans in my family, so I very much wanted to play the Vietnam veteran. I got the chance to do it, and that introduced me to the DAV. I started working with our wounded at that point.
But it really gave hope to veterans who had gone through this, who suffered from PTSD, who had lost limbs, and you were an alcoholic in the movie, and then your life changed completely, and it gave hope to a lot of veterans, right?
I think, you know, up until that point, there had been a certain number of Vietnam-themed films, but you always felt that the Vietnam veteran might not be okay at the end of the movie. That was the first time we saw the story of a Vietnam veteran, and he's okay in the end. He's moving on with his life. He's clean cut. He's successful in business. He's standing up on new legs. He's married. He's moving on with his life, and that's a positive story that we want for all our returning veterans.
Absolutely. Before, you know, you got the accolades for this particular role, was it just another job, hey, look, I got another role, or was it different than the others?
No, you mean when I went into it?
Yeah, was it just, okay, I got this role, it's opposite Tom Hanks, it's going to be a big movie?
I wanted the part very much. I have Vietnam veterans in my family, so I wanted to play this part very much. And in honor of the Vietnam veterans I know and the family members, that, and I write about that in the book, how important that moment was and what it did to not only change my career, but to turn my life into a life of
Did you know it would be
service.
that big, though?
No.
25 years this year. The name of the book is Grateful American. That's how you feel. That's the theme throughout the book. You just give nonstop in between projects and CSI and the series. All you do is you just give back through the Lieutenant Dan Band. And even I saw you the other night. I was honored to be asked to interview you for the launch of your book on Sunday to benefit the firefighters, Friends of Firefighters the other night. So you packed that place because you're giving back to firefighters as well.
Yeah, I can truly say the 80s planted some real seeds in terms of support of Vietnam veterans. The 90s, I started working with our wounded. Then after September 11th, I just needed to do something positive. And so I jumped in full force to try to help the men and women who were deploying in reaction to that terrible day. And firefighters who were here on September 11th and just started supporting many, many different organizations, and it all accumulated into the Gary Sinise Foundation. That's why I wrote
Gary,
the book.
tell us about your childhood, your high school career, what happened there, and then how you got into acting.
Did you read a little bit
Yes.
of the book? So there's some misbehavior in the book as a young man. You know, I didn't know what the book was going to be called.
There you are.
When I said, oh yeah, there we are. That's a little family shot there. I didn't know what the book was going to be called when I started writing it, but as I was going through it, these recurring themes of gratitude and appreciation, and this kind of journey from this self-focused acting career life early on that I began in high school, the troubles that I had in high school as a young man and overcoming those things, and then moving into a life of service, it really became clear to me what the story was about.
The other thing is the impact of a teacher. This drama teacher that saw something in you, you were dressed like a hoodlum, and they were casting West Side Story. You said you had no direction. He says, why don't you come down and audition? Something told you to audition. It changed your life.
No, completely, and it began something that I ended up doing for a living and having a good living at. I was standing in a hallway with the rock band members. I played in a rock band, and we were pretty scruffy, and she walked down the hall. She looked at us and she said, you look like gang members. Come and audition for West Side Story. And so I went and auditioned just on a whim, and I got in the play, and it turned everything around. I was a struggling
Have you
kid.
talked to that teacher since?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to see her in about a week.
Oh, that's great.
That's really cool.
So as your friends went off to college, you had to go to another semester of high school. And
did,
she got you in another play. And instead of sitting back and letting things happen, you start your own theater company. Steppenwolf is one of the most lauded, respected theater companies in the country, and it started in a church basement by a guy that did need an extra semester to get out of high school.
Well, yeah, and it was a group of kids. We just wanted to continue doing plays. I was having a great time in high school doing plays. I did have to go back for an extra semester because I didn't have enough credits to graduate, but I did a great play, Cyrano de Bergerac, and I got to play Cyrano, and it was a great, it made going back to high school worth it because I got to play a great part. And then right after high school, started, 18 years old, started Steppenwolf Theater with my pals, and it grew into a theater that's now 45 years old.
And a lot of famous people that we interview, they don't want to be known as a role that they played 25 years ago, but you've embraced it. You even have the Lieutenant Dan Band.
Well, it's because of
Yeah,
it's not only that, but it's the relationship that I found that character was having with our wounded when I started visiting the hospitals after September 11th and visiting, you know, very, very badly wounded service members. And I'd walk in the room, they wouldn't know what my real name was, but they recognized me from the movie, and they wanted to talk about Lieutenant Dan and all of that. And you know, when I started visiting the war zones, they did the same thing. They called me Lieutenant Dan all the time, so I started a band and named it after the character.
Wow, and it's fantastic. You've raised, Gary Sinise Foundation has raised how much?
Well, we've raised a lot of money over the last 8 years. We continue to provide a lot of services, and we always need support.
Very humble.
The book,
hundreds of millions.
The book is out today. It's called Grateful American. Gary Sinise, thank you very much.
You have a life purpose.
Yeah.
And you're living it.
Thanks for having me.
And a great American story.
Thank you.
Pick up
right,
his
Gary.
book. It's an awesome book. We've read it.
I'll talk to you on radio later.
All right, the winter storm wreaking havoc across the Midwest, closing in on the Northeast.
Okay, the snowy mess causing massive pileups across that right there. You're looking at Wisconsin. Trouble there.
Janice Dean's been studying this and tracking this dangerous system closely. Where are we at, Janice?
Well, we're going to see snow in the New York City area real quick. Let's take a look at the maps, and I will show you where the storm is. We've got freezing rain happening in Philadelphia, rain and snow in Pittsburgh, and then it's cloudy here in New York, but the snow is closing in. I don't want you to focus on the snow totals because this is going to be a potentially devastating ice storm in some areas. Chicago is under ice storm warning, Toledo as well, and we're going to see ice across big areas of the Northeast, including New York City, including Long Island, including Connecticut, up towards Boston. So even though we're not going to be dealing with a blockbuster snowstorm, the ice where you see pink on the map, that is the potentially bad area where we could see, you know, crippling travel basically across those regions. So that's what I want to make sure people know. Even though we have winter weather advisories temperatures, and we associate that with snow. This is going to be a potential ice event, and that's why they're closing schools. Real quick, what are your names? Where are you from?
Lisa Stone, Nacogdoches, Texas.
Terry Stone.
And you're dressed appropriately for a nice storm. All right, thank you for coming, my friends. Thank you for watching Fox and Friends. Back inside.
That's right. All right, very good. It's coming. All right.
Thanks, Janice. All right, the singer made a splash on the Grammys red carpet with his pro-Trump jacket, and he's not apologizing for it. His name is Ricky Rebel, and he's going to join us live.
You agree? I agree. It makes us less, not more safe. El Paso's been one of the safest cities in the United States of America for 20 years and counting. Safe before a wall, safe after a wall. And in fact, after the wall was built here in 2008, safety actually decreased, not increased. We don't need walls. We need to treat one another with respect and dignity.
You can see our Todd Pyro in that crowd talking to Beto O'Rourke. There were dueling rallies down in El Paso yesterday. President Trump speaking in front of thousands of supporters. A far cry from the anti-wall march that was led by Beto O'Rourke nearby, where about half of that amount, they're saying, rallied to support sanctuary cities and oppose the wall.
Todd Pyro is there. He joins us live from Elmer's Family Restaurant in El Paso, Texas, where he's talking to the folks the day after the two shows. Hey, Todd.
Hey, guys. One of the great things about El Paso, and specifically Elmer's Family Restaurant, is the diversity of opinion. And it doesn't just include opinions, it includes diversity of food. In the 6 o'clock hour, I had Latino food, now chicken and waffles. How cool is that? And speaking of diversity of opinion, we have Laura. She's a waitress here at Elmer's, and you love the way Beto O'Rourke has done amazing things here in this community. Why do you say that?
Well, we believe he has a more accurate representation of what the borderland is, and we believe he can speak truth to us and Congress and government.
Understood. All right, Rob. Rob, you say you are sick and tired of all the bitterness that's going on in the world. Why do you say that?
Yes, I think that we should do like El Pasoans around the world and become one, work together, use all this bipartisan efforts and get something done together. Quit hating on